am a sexual assault survivor, and I started for advocating for rights and survivors in Austin, Texas when I was 19 in 2015 after my case was extremely mishandled by Austin Police Department and the Travis County District Attorney Margaret Moore.
Deciding to look into my own sexual assaults and wanting to understand what happened to me at a different level, hoping that I could process them at a different level. And what I quickly realized was that in order for me to understand what happened to me, I had to understand how the system was working. Or to say it differently, I quickly understood that, you know, part of what happened to me was how the system was working. And through that journey, found out about the lawsuit and found out about the struggles that many other survivors had in reporting their crimes. And it was one in which, for many years, I thought something was wrong with me in my case. And it was the reason why I wasn't able to move forward with it. And then I learned about so many others that had so many more I don't want to use the word severe because it's not a comparison, but cases that had a lot more evidence that weren't moving forward either. And I quickly realized that there was something more at hand.
Speaking out is like a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
What do you think got you to the place where you decided that you wanted to do that?
Honestly, it was like a breaking point for me. I mean, I had been trying to push back. No one was listening to me. I was just like this 19-year-old that had all my power taken away from me, was so hurt and scared and confused. And I just needed people to know that. I needed someone else to help me, whoever that was. And
Right. If this phase is, if we were to name it, if it was a chapter in a book, it would be like just discovery, right? Like understanding all the how this system works, the issues, kind of the people impacted, and how, I think it's a true kind of uncovering of an issue, and that we'll always be learning about.
What do you think being a city that actually achieves justice for survivors would look like?
We have such a long way to go. And I think that, to be honest, the survivors that are advocating for change and the plaintiffs in the lawsuit have actually spoken on this so much more eloquently than I can. I'm so grateful for their leadership and for speaking out on something that was so traumatic. I think there is so much more we can do around providing trauma-informed care, around ensuring that survivors have everything that they need to start healing from the very beginning.
And that was so scary.
I will say
okay. So taking yourself out of like a victim's shoes and just thinking like how intimidating our system is, and then remembering the trauma that victims have experienced, the compounded generational trauma that a lot of the victims have faced, and then the injustices of our system. And so if I have been a victim of sexual assault and I have gone through the very invasive space of going and getting a forensic exam completed, I don't think that everybody understands like exactly what that exam entails and how invasive it is. And then to be told that there's not enough evidence, or then to be told that they can't find my kit, or then to be told that it's going to take years and years before I'll ever see that abuser in court. And I want to live my life. I want to close this chapter. I want to begin healing. I want to move on and put this behind me, right? But there's still that open wound until there is any justice.
For me, it's 6 years of my life coming to a close. And it was hard. I mean, I dropped out of college, like all of those things, and wanting to quit so many times, and I didn't. So I think I would definitely tell myself that it's worth it and to keep going, and that I've learned so much about myself through this process and found really great people in my life now. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't change a thing about it, as as horrible as it was, as, you know, I will always have PTSD in some form, it is so much better now. You know, I've really done a lot of healing and a lot of therapy.
One of the survivors that I spoke to about their interaction with sworn officers, she was not a small person. She was a larger woman. She was a full-grown adult. And when she was providing evidence for her case, she was given the standard thing that they give people to put the evidence in, and it was a Ziploc bag this big. And she said, I can't fit my clothing. I can't even fit my underwear into a bag that size. It's thoughts like that. It's if you are a survivor of sexual assault and you go to the police department and you have to sit down with a police officer who's questioning and asking questions like, well, what were you wearing? Well, how much did you have to drink? Things that make you really question whether you did something wrong. When you're in that room, we want to make sure that the room has soft lighting and that it has a comfortable couch and that maybe there's a blanket so that the process feels comfortable and doesn't make you feel re-victimized, re-traumatized all over again. Those are some of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about trauma-informed care.
I think that there's a lot of people that kind of are silenced about rape and sexual violence.
Other piece that's so hard is that we have so much stigma about sexual assault and sexual harassment that so often people don't want to come forward and talk about it. And that could be for a panoply of reasons, right? They think that it was their fault, or they are embarrassed, or they're not really sure what happened. So often we get people calling and saying, I don't know if this was sexual assault or not. There's also something where you're worried about getting the person who hurt you in trouble. And that might be because you go to college with them and you don't want them to get in trouble, or you don't want their friends to think you're getting them in trouble. That might be because you share a life with them and they're the parent to your children. So there's a whole vast set of reasons why people might not come forward. But what that means is that people aren't processing, they're not getting the support that they need. And I would just really encourage people to start to talk to someone and to make sure that they're getting what they deserve after an unwanted sexual experience.
I still believe that much of our city, and any city in this nation, doesn't really understand what it's like to report sexual assault. And when they find out and really understand what that looks like, they're often just as appalled as any of those of us that went through it. And so there's great work to be done there yet, not just for systemic changes, but for the lived experience of the individuals that have gone through it themselves, that have gone through assault, that haven't had folks to talk to. And there's so many angles to it. It's just not the survivor's perspective and experience, but there's perspectives and experiences of our family members. There's also a lot of dialogue that needs to occur around our perpetrators and why it is that we have such a problem nationally with this issue. What's fostering that, and what do we do about that? When I got in this space, one of the questions that I continue to ask is, where are all the men in these conversations? And knowing that, roughly 90% of the perpetrators are men, we can't solve this issue without their involvement. But it also is really tricky, because I think it's very difficult for men sometimes to move into the space without feeling like they have fingers being pointed at them. So how are we able to break down those walls and talk about what it is that's happening in our society, that's happening across genders in many cases, so that we can move forward and actually work towards solutioning? Because I don't believe that we've gotten there thus far.
I have to go on a soapbox for just a second. I think the other huge issue facing our society is consent, and not teaching people about consent. I have a 9-year-old boy, and there's an acronym called FRIES. The acronym FRIES in relation to consent, FRIES: freely given, revocable, informed, enthusiastic, which is obviously my favorite, and specific. So that's the FRIES acronym that helps us know what consent is in our house.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate being able to spend the time with you.
Thank you so much, Greg. And thank you for having these conversations. We really appreciate you.
Shining. The reality in this space is not pretty. I learned about exceptional clearance when the rest of the city learned about the issues of handling of exceptional clearance within our police department. And I learned that I was one of them, during that time as well. And something else that I think is important is that this is not just an issue with Austin. This is an issue that's existing across our nation. But I've learned not just about sexual assault and what it looks like in our community, but what it looks like in our police departments, in our DA's office, and how I've had to learn a little bit about how politics work in this regard, and that hasn't always been easy either.
It was interesting because I think if you're in the field a long time, you assume that things are, like really normal. And even though they're terrible, you get used to like a certain way that things are. And I think that, there was people kind of, especially the Women's Commission, because they're not in the field, that were shocked by it. And I think that was really helpful for me kind of to step a little bit outside of that kind of day-to-day as an advocate and be like, yeah, that actually, it is horrifying.
I know that when I started out, I thought awareness was the issue. And one thing I've had to learn is that it's not just about awareness. It is awareness for some, but not for all. I'm a data person, and so I was pretty astounded when I saw the numbers when I first started digging into things and learning that 2 in 5 Texas women will be survivors of sexual assault is pretty shocking to me. And you look at the numbers.
And I think, I don't know if I've heard you say some of these things before, which is really, I'm so glad, makes me so glad that we can have the conversation, because it sounds like 2 things that were holding, the rape kit backlog had existed before the lab had closed, right, for years. And sometimes I've wondered what things kept that there so hidden. And it sounds like you kind of talk about, on the one hand, people having sort of low expectations for leadership, and then new people hearing about it, getting involved, sort of setting higher expectations. And then another thing being folks not wanting to stir the waters too much because it could hurt folks, but then that can maybe further the disrespect in and of itself. Did people ever put it back on y'all that you were doing the wrong thing? Yeah. Did you question it? I mean, talk about that process for y'all.
We had a chief, we had leaders in government that told us that, now survivors aren't going to report because of, speaking out about this. And I think that it was a great public conversation to have about, okay, is exposing systemic harm and systemic issues on the people that speak, or is that, something that's really on the system? And I think that was the first time I interface with hostility. It's like, who doesn't want to make sure rape survivors are doing okay? It was just a shock to me. But then it's like, oh, so you don't. I guess we got to play hardball. So it was interesting to be in a situation where we were being blamed.
What message would you want to uplift so that folks in Austin could hear it?
The biggest message is just please start by believing. Please, whenever you encounter someone who tells you that they have had an unwanted sexual experience, whether it's someone touching them inappropriately at work or someone that they went out on a date with, acting in a way, attacking them sexually, whatever it is, start by believing. That doesn't mean that you don't verify, but it means that you start by believing and you listen and you're really a support system. The second thing is that we talk a lot about this trauma-informed care, and that is part of the starting by believing. But it's also sort of trauma-informed care is a way of ensuring that every step of the way, survivors are asked what they need, they're listened to.
I think we talk about in sexual assault, like the, outcry witness or first person someone tells about their assault is so important to someone's mental health, and long-term healing. So
yeah, I just wish that people realized how frequently it happens and know how to talk to their loved ones about it. You know, I was blessed to have an amazing support system in my life with my mother, but that's not typically the case. And so I wish that from the vulnerability that I gave, that people were allowed to have conversations with survivors in their life to help them move forward, or to reach out and make the first connection to therapy, you know, to do little things like that that help with the healing of been. And then the justice.
You not quitting, I think inspires a lot of other people to never quit. And so
yeah.
I just am so in awe of you and really appreciate everything you've taught me. You know, this, I really started out in some of this work hearing your testimony, and I think is a big part of the reason that a lot of us have learned what we've gotten to learn. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for getting together and talking with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. I mean, it very much feels full circle to me that the first time I spoke out was essentially to you. I felt like you were the only one listening. And so to have had you actively been a part of it the whole time, and now for it to end.
What does the work look like going forward for our community? Because obviously it can't just stop with the lawsuit. And so what do you think moving forward looks like?
Yeah. You know, it's clear to me that we've taken our current lawsuit as far as we can. And I do believe that there need to be movements after us that continue to push on things. I know for me personally, I want to move into a different space. I think of having dialogue with those that are wanting to have the dialogue, you know, talking in community. As you know, how we spend our time, I think it's just a continuation of the conversation. You know, how do we keep people coming together and talking about this so that the conversation can continue, so that there is more dialogue and more movement forward? Because without that, we won't see the change that's needed.